we are going to do something we have never done, which is pretend that you are in a huge literature English class of 100+ people. And what the teacher does is stands at the podium and lectures about the books you're reading and leaves it to the TA to discuss with you in small groups. So this is new for me too, because I've only ever taught writing seminars, and I am used to talking about the book through discussion. But since that's hard from us, and I want to review the themes in the discussion this week, I'm going to give you a lecture on the section of the book that we've read. And probably it will be in 2 parts because it will take me so long. So let's try it. Okay. So hopefully you finished reading the book right now, and hopefully you didn't find it torture. One of the ways at looking at this book as a whole and the last section is to ask who survives and finds happiness and who doesn't. Well, the ones who survive and find happiness are, of course, Mother, Tata, and the children. And not coincidentally, I think, these are the characters that have found themselves able to change and adapt to their circumstances. At the very end of the book, Tata looks out the window at his family, and he sees them playing out there, white and black, and Jew and Christian. And let's see if I can show you the quotation, hopefully. Yeah. He suddenly had an idea for a film. A bunch of children who were pals, white, black, fat, thin, sorry, dictation error, rich, poor, all kinds, mischievous little urchins who would have funny adventures in their own neighborhood, a society of ragamuffins, like all of us, a gang, getting into trouble and getting out again, but together. So basically, Tata has this vision of his family, and it leads him to a vision of what America could be like. That America could be this place where people of all backgrounds and all races and all creeds got along and were united in some way and cared about each other. And if you can compare that to the image at the beginning of the book of another family, it becomes even more powerful. Because you remember that in the beginning of the book, we start with the image of mother and father's family, and it's a white family with mother, father, and the son, and younger brother, and grandfather, and they're all white, and they're all middle class, and there were no Negroes, remember that? And there were no immigrants. And then Doctorow ends by giving us this image of a different America that has black people and that has immigrants and that has white people and that has them all learning to live with each other, and not just learning to live with each other, but being a family. So how did Tata end up with this family? Well, mother and father went to Atlantic City, and they find there the Baron Ashkenazi, who's really Tata, but he's given him this name to get him around in Christian society without a lot of questions about his background. Okay, so this is one sign. So it might not feel good that he has to hide who he is, but it is a sign of his adaptability. And there are better signs than that too. He's excited by life. He looks at everything like it's new. He has this little rectangle he holds up to his eye and looks through to see how it would look, on a movie screen, now that he's a movie maker. He looks at everything like it's new. He's very open-minded to what's new and very willing to change. And the children are the ones who become really great friends first. And there's a particular image that's also about change with the children. Their favorite game is to bury each other and then to break free. So again, we have this breaking out of imprisonment theme, but also it's an image of transformation, of even rebirth. Doctorow describes the shape that the children make on the ground, and it might sound like he's trying to sexualize them, but actually I think he's trying to make it clear that when they're buried, they look like mummies. Okay, so they're mummified and then they're reborn. And they do this again and again. The children are completely open to change. Okay? Not only do they immediately attach to one another, but remember we had Edgar, the little boy, earlier in the book, looking at himself in the mirror until he seemed like someone different and noticing change all around him and loving stories of transformation. And so he and the little girl, Doctorow even points out that they can't even tell that the other one is beautiful. Because they're too close from that. We have them transforming themselves into a family, and their parents will follow. Mother and Tata fall in love. The parents follow when they can. So what about Father? Well, one of Father's core traits is that he can't change. Let's see a quotation. Younger brother says when Father comes in to talk to Coalhouse and his group as a representative of the white police, "You've traveled everywhere and learned nothing," says younger brother. And wow, younger brother has learned to speak and express himself. Remember, when younger brother first joins Coalhouse, he has all these thoughts he wants to express about the nobility of Coalhouse's fight for justice and everything it stands for, but all he can say is, "I know how to blow things up." But younger brother has changed, actually. He can now express himself. Let's see what else he has to say about Father. We'll come back to him later. "You are a complacent man with no thought of history. You pay your employees poorly and are insensitive to their needs. The fact that you think of yourself as a gentleman in all of your dealings is a simple self-delusion of all those who oppress humanity." So there's a lot here to unpack. Basically, Father is a complacent man with no thought of history. He doesn't understand his place in history. He doesn't even understand that history is the history of change. And because of that, he belongs completely to an era that is passing. An era of, the Victorian era where he was born, the late 1800s, and its prejudices and its standards and its, kind of uptight behavior, which makes it impossible for him to enjoy the baseball game, earlier, because everybody is, shouting and excited and happy and acting like actually we would think people at a baseball game should act. Father can't change. He can't step out of his place in time and move into a new time. And so he ends up dying with the time and not surviving to see something new. The other part of this quotation that's interesting is the self-delusion. So Father thinks he's a gentleman and thinks he's a good guy, and he thinks all his dealings are right and good because, of course, he only counts his dealings with other white men of his class. The dealings he has with his, the maid, and the dealings he has with his workers or whatever, those don't count in his view of himself. So there's a self-delusion that comes with being Father, with counting yourself a gentleman, okay, of Father's era, where you only count the way you treat those of your own class to matter. And again, that's Father can't change that, okay? I mean, he doesn't change the way he sees the Eskimos, even though he recognizes that Peary's amazing system of surviving on the ice is just living like an Eskimo. He understands that intellectually, but it doesn't change the way he sees the Eskimos kind of as animals, even. He can't change the way he sees Coalhouse's baby. He wants Mother to put him down, and Mother doesn't want to put him down because she's already come to love Coalhouse Walker III, as the baby ends up being named as her own child. But for Father, he could never be a part of their family. So Father can't change. And so it's symbolic that he's killed in the bombing of the Lusitania, because the Lusitania is a ship full of passengers, 1,200 families, 1,200 passengers, including men, women, and children. But the U.S. was also secretly sending arms to England to help them in World War I. It was before U.S. joined World War I, but we were sending military aid, and it was bombed by Germans, and all those people died. And so in the story, Father is on that ship bringing weapons, because that's one of the things his company makes, to England, and he's killed in the bombing. And it's very symbolic because the Lusitania was the kind of turning point for a lot of Americans in them getting ready to enter World War I, and them feeling that, yes, this is our fight too, because people were very upset about all the innocents who died when the Germans bombed the Lusitania. Okay, so that's Father. He doesn't survive to see the new age. As we enter the new era, the World War I era, and then everything that will follow with the Roaring 20s and then the Depression in the 30s, he doesn't make it. He dies as the era starts to change. And what does Mother do? Even before marrying Tata, she buys a car and hits the road with the kids. And as we remember from Coalhouse's story, a car is kind of symbolic of freedom. So she and Father separate after the Atlantic City trip, even though they don't get divorced. It was a lot harder to get divorced in those days. She leaves Father, and I highly recommend the lyrics to the song Back to Before, if you want to follow the lyrics links in online readings and resources, to get kind of an internal view of Mother and how she's changed from someone who can let Father make her decisions into someone who has to make her decisions herself. Okay, so she's freed from her marriage, and as Emma Goldman once called it, the double bondage of half of the human race. And so that leads us to Coalhouse. So Coalhouse ends up in a much more complex situation. So here's what Coalhouse says. As for my execution, he said, my death was determined the moment Sarah died. So as you've been reading about Coalhouse's revolution, you might have been thinking, God, he's so short-sighted, how does he expect to get out of this? And the answer is he doesn't expect to get out of this. He expects to be killed. He expects to die fighting for justice. And so he's not planning for a way out. He's not planning for a way to win and be safe and happy again. He's planning to die because Sarah's dead. And in some ways that makes everything he does seem a little bit more logical when you think of himself as on the road to his death, his own death. So in this section that we just read, Coalhouse's plan takes a leap that to some people seems the least logical, because what they end up doing is they take the Morgan Library hostage. But there's another way in which this seems, in some ways, the most logical possible thing he could do. J.P. Morgan is associated with wealth more than anyone else in the country. And so in Coalhouse's mind, he's associated also with white power. And as often happens in the book, Emma Goldman gets to explain this to us. So Emma gets arrested because the police like to pick her up when anything goes wrong. And they keep asking her if Coalhouse was one of her disciples, if she taught Coalhouse what to believe. And of course, she's never met Coalhouse and has nothing to do with him. And here's what she says. The Negro was tormented into action, so I understand, by the cruel death of his fiancée, an innocent young woman. Again, sorry for the dictation error. The oppressor is wealth, my friends. Wealth is the oppressor. Coalhouse Walker did not need Red Emma to learn that. He needed only to suffer. So here we're getting closer and closer to the heart of the book, which is that the enemy is the rich and wealth, and how they twist the system so that they have more power and people who are not wealthy have less power. So this is even mixed up in the racial injustice that Coalhouse suffers because, of course, Coalhouse is really an exception in that he makes a middle-class salary. Okay, basically all black people at this time are among the poor, and that is because of racial injustice and because they can't get any other jobs. And so Coalhouse associates the whole system he's fighting against with J.P. Morgan, and it's not that far of a leap, actually. Because Morgan, as we remember, Morgan is the one who believes that he's so successful because he's part God, part Egyptian God. He's not even human. He's so far above his workers and the rest of humanity. And even death doesn't change Morgan's mind. We can talk a bit about Morgan's end. So he visits a pyramid, and he has this horrible nightmare in which he's an ordinary person. And to him, that's a horrible nightmare. But he manages to dismiss it, and the fact that he's eaten by bed bugs when he falls asleep in the pyramid. And after that, his health begins to decline, and he begins to get closer to death. But even that doesn't break through to his arrogance, because he thinks that God must be making him die so that he can be reborn again, because, gosh, humanity needs him so bad. So Morgan reaches his end as still convinced that he is, towers and towers and skyscrapers above the rest of humanity. And the other really rich person we get to know, Henry K. Thaw, the one who is married to and abused Evelyn Nesbit. He gets the very last image in the entire book. And what is he doing? He's marching in a parade, despite the fact that he committed murder, because he could afford really good lawyers, and they managed to get him committed to an insane asylum instead of taken to jail, and then he manages to convince, the insane asylum that he's cured, and he's set free. Basically, the message is the rich can get away with anything. And so long as the rich can get away with anything, the justice system will never work for everybody else. And of course, this, is absolutely true today. How much you can spend on a lawyer has a lot to do with your chances of being acquitted or convicted if you're a company that's being sued for some kind of wrongdoing. Our prisons are completely racially imbalanced because the darker your skin is, the more likely you are to be convicted, and the longer your sentence is likely to be. And we'll talk more about it at the end too. So Coalhouse understands that the way to get attention, to send a message, is to involve the very rich. Let's see. More than any mayor or governor, he represented, and he is J.P. Morgan, in Coalhouse's mind, the power of the white world. And Coalhouse wants the attention. He wants to send a message. Remember, he doesn't want to survive. He wants to die fighting for justice and send his message out as widely as he can. And so going after J.P. Morgan works. It absolutely becomes the logical way to get the attention of the press and the authorities and the white world as it is. Doctorow writes, "Or is it injustice once suffered, a mere universe, with laws of logic and principles of reason the opposite of civilizations?" He's talking about whether Coalhouse is crazy here. Is Coalhouse crazy? Or is it that once you've suffered injustice, the only logic that's left to you is the logic of craziness? And so the least logical Coalhouse becomes in one sense. The farther he gets from the people who actually did him harm, the more his struggle becomes a symbolic struggle for justice. And in this mirror universe, okay, as Doctorow says, what makes people hear your cry for justice? Well, violence, rich people, and everything else that makes the news. everything that's the opposite of civilization, calmly filing complaints as Coalhouse tried to do. For kind of another glimpse into Coalhouse's mind and strategy, I really recommend the song Make Them Hear You. So in the play, when Coalhouse sings this song when he's talking to the younger members of his the young men who've come to follow him, and he's trying to convince them to leave, to take the police's offer and leave Coalhouse, to face the firing squad alone. And he says, make them hear you. Go out and tell my story to your children and your wives. Make them hear you. How justice was demanded and how justice was denied. Make them hear you. And tell it to those, and tell to those who's, I should give you the lyrics. Okay, and tell to those who question the way we thought to fight that sometimes there are problems that are more than black and white. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with that. And go on to part 2 because it's too much. I'm afraid the file's getting too big.